Welcome to this week's Confirmation to Go for the 6th and 7th grade confirmation class. This week we have the memory work of the second article of the Creed, and we are also kind of caught up. We're at the sweet point in our studies because we're looking at the second part of the second article of the Creed as well in the class. So to begin with, let's look at and work on the second article of the Creed from the Catechism. Again, I'm going to leave out the actual creed itself. My expectation is that as we go over it weekly, it is getting ingrained in the children. But my encouragement to you is to make saying the creed a part of your home life. Daily, it would be best. But even if you just take a time out once or twice a week to recite it together as a family, to confess your faith together as a family, that would be wonderful and lovely. And so let me encourage you again to do that. In fact, to take the time to recite the Ten Commandments, to recite to confess the Creed, which is we don't just recite it, we confess it, and to pray the Lord's Prayer. Again, we don't just say it, we do pray it. Those are important things to make part of your life, and especially the Lord's Prayer. Luther's encouragement is that we pray the Lord's Prayer 5 times a day. I think many of us would struggle to do it that often, but even if we just did it once a day, that would be a wonderful thing to help get it ingrained in our hearts. Well, with that said, we focus on the meaning of the second article. I believe that Jesus Christ, true God, begotten of the Father from eternity, and also true man, born of the Virgin Mary, is my Lord, who has redeemed me, a lost and condemned person, purchased and won me from all sins, from death, and from the power of the devil, not with gold or silver, but with his holy, precious blood, and with his innocent suffering and death, that I may be his own and live under him in his kingdom and serve him in everlasting righteousness, innocence, and blessedness, just as he has risen from the dead, lives and reigns to all eternity. This is most certainly true. The main thing as you work through these is to understand what questions are being answered here. And the kids were really astute about this. The very first paragraph there answers the question, well, who is Jesus, right? And notice that if you kind of take out the middle part here, I believe that Jesus Christ, and you kind of skip down to the end, is my Lord. That's really the entire thought being carried out. The stuff in the middle is helping to explain why he is my Lord, that he is true God and true man. This double identity for God is so important. And we talked about that in the class. He's not half God and half man. He is fully God and fully man. Two full things fully there in Jesus Christ. And so I think if you understand it that way, it helps hang it together. I believe that Jesus Christ is my Lord, and then adding in true God, begotten of the Father from eternity, and also true man, born of the Virgin Mary. The next section answers the question, well, what has this Jesus done? And we get 3 verbs here that carry us across. He has redeemed me, he has purchased me, he has won me. Right? He has redeemed me, and who am I? A lost and condemned person. He has purchased and won me from all sins, from death, and from the power of the devil. So, the redeemed and then purchased and won are really synonyms for each other. Redeemed is a very churchy word, but again, your kids do know it from redeeming coupons and game codes. But if you just see it as purchased back or bought back, you've got a pretty good understanding for it. And then the one language. But then the first one, he has redeemed me. And then we explain who we are. Well, I am a lost and condemned person, right? Which means I cannot save myself. I am utterly lost without Jesus' help. And then purchased and won me. And now, instead of explaining who I am, it tells us, well, who am I being bought back from? Who am I being purchased and won from? And this is coming from 3 enemies, from sin, from death, and from the power of the devil. And those 3 things, those are our 3 great enemies, sometimes called the unholy trinity, but that's not very accurate, but they are certainly 3 things that are our great enemies. All right. And then we're explaining how that purchasing was made. Not with gold or silver, but with his holy, precious blood and his innocent suffering and death. Well, why did he do all these things? That's what the next paragraph answers. That I may be his own and live under him in his kingdom and serve him. So here we have 3 things. That I may be his own, that I may live under him in his kingdom and serve him. And then here, how do I serve him? I serve him in everlasting righteousness, innocence, and blessedness. Those three ideas are easy to confuse with each other, right? They're all S's, as it were. But if you remember it as RIB, righteousness, innocence, and blessedness, I find that very helpful in keeping those in the correct order as you say them. R-I-B, RIB. And then finally, just as he has risen from the dead, lives and reigns to all eternity. This is most certainly true. So I hope you find that helpful for the memory work this week. Now, on to what we discussed in class. We talked about primarily Jesus' identity last week, but we also introduced what he has done. We talked about the redeemed and purchased and won. We spent a good deal of class time then unpacking, well, what is it? What are some other words that the Bible uses to explain what Jesus has done? And there's a whole list of them, and the kids were coming up with some very good ones. We have the language of forgiveness. I'm forgiven. It's really running in the same, all of these are connected to the cross of Jesus. In fact, we read in 1 Corinthians that Paul wanted to know nothing among them but Christ and him crucified. And the same is true for us today. We want to know nothing but Christ and him crucified, but we can know it in so many ways. So we can understand it with this financial language, like that he's purchased me, he's bought me. We can also understand it with the language of forgiveness. One of the kids brought up the language of cleansed, and that certainly is a good one and powerful one. We have the language of reconciliation. That's a financial term as well, but it's also a familial term, isn't it? And we talked about if two sisters don't talk to each other for 5 years, but then finally come together and start talking to each other again, that's reconciliation, being brought back together. And that's what's happened with us. Jesus has brought us back together with God. The language of adoption, that's terms that the Bible uses for these. We talked about other things like propitiation. That's a really big word, but the Bible does use it. And so it's important to wrestle with it. And propitiation means that God's wrath against our sin has been taken away, because in fact our sins have been taken away. Well, there's lots of ways to talk about it, and the Bible is full of them. And finally, we explained it like a diamond. If you have a diamond, it will have different facets, different cuts on the face. And you can turn it and you'll see slightly different things as you turn the diamond, right? The light will hit it in different ways. You'll see it from a different perspective, but you're still looking at the same diamond. And that's how I want us to understand the cross. When we use these different ways to talk about the cross, we're not talking about different things. We're talking about the same thing looked at from slightly different directions. And really it just goes to show the richness of what Jesus accomplished on the cross, that we can't really just use one idea to talk about it. We have to use lots of different ideas and build them together to talk about it. And that's such an important thing. And that's why understanding some of these churchy words, some of these Bible words is very important, because they are driving at exactly what Jesus did for us on the cross. We also talked about how the creed explains Jesus' life. And it really does it in two parts. It talks about how he was conceived and born, and then he suffered, died. He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried, right? And that we call his humiliation. Humiliation means to be brought low. The second part of his life is his exaltation, being raised up. And it starts in a very strange place, because it starts with his descent into hell. Jesus did not go into hell to suffer further. If he did, it would be part of his humiliation. But we know that's not true. He did it all on the cross, and he said it was finished on the cross. So why did Jesus go into hell? Well, Jesus went into hell to proclaim his victory to Satan and to all those there, to show that God in fact kept his promise. And no matter how powerful Satan looks in this world, he is defeated utterly and completely because of what Jesus has done. Just what he proclaimed to Satan in hell, he proclaims to us from the empty tomb. He is risen. He is alive. He is with us for all eternity. This is the wonderful promise of the empty tomb. We talked about how the cross and the empty tomb shouldn't be pitted against each other. They really are complementary and the same idea. Jesus accomplished all the good things on the cross, But we wouldn't know those good things were true except for the empty tomb, except that Jesus is alive and reigning over us. And so we use the empty tomb to let us know with confidence that what Jesus accomplished on the cross is true and for us. He ascended into heaven, and then we're at the point where he sits at the right hand of God the Father, and we're waiting for him to come again to judge both the living and the dead. That's his exaltation, his being lifted up. It's important to note that what the difference between his humiliation and his exaltation is not the fact that Jesus became human, because Jesus is human now, and he's still exalted on the throne of God, and he will come again as our judge as a human. So it's not his humanity that humiliates him. The thing that was humiliating for them is that while Jesus was fully God during his life and ministry on earth, leading up to his crucifixion, Jesus didn't use his divine powers completely. He kind of put them on the side and didn't tap into them, although at times he did. And the kids very astutely recognized that whenever he did tap into his divine powers, we have a word for that, it's called miracles, right? Whenever he did things that a human simply could not do on his own, that was him tapping into his his divinity and doing great things for the benefit of all people. So that's why Jesus as a baby didn't talk. In fact, he grew up and did a normal growing up as a human being would grow up. There were times when Jesus would get tired or be hungry or thirsty. All of that is because he didn't fully have his, while he fully had his divinity, he didn't fully use his divinity. But then after his resurrection, you see him, even though he is human, he is fully using his divinity. He's appearing in rooms suddenly. Things like doors don't hold him back. He can appear wherever he wants to, whenever he wants to, because he's God. He can certainly do whatever he wants. And he can hide his appearance, and people simply don't recognize him in certain aspects because he doesn't want to be recognized. But when he wants to be recognized, they do recognize him. And so he fully takes up his divinity, and of course he has the fullness of his divinity now and will forever. So that's the big difference between his exaltation and his humiliation. Well, we actually have a little bit more to talk to about the second article next week, but we'll also be diving into the third article as we go forward. So I hope that you found this informative. I pray that you can bring this and it's useful for you in your home teaching and home devotions. Continue to work on the sheets that I send you home. Again, using the catechism, especially the questions and answers in the back to help find the answers. It's all right there in the catechism. And I pray God's blessings on your week ahead.